With Ukraine conflict, does Russia want to change the European borders again? If Russia further invades Ukraine, there will be significant costs and consequences. Russia will be held accountable if it invades. The risk of conflict is real. This is an extremely dangerous situation. We're now at a stage where Russia could at any point launch an attack. World continues to watch 100,000 Russian troops stand on Ukraine's border. There's so many questions people have. But will Russia really invade? Will Europe defend Ukraine? And will the US intervene? As well as, is this the start of World War III? In order to make sense of this, or what we're witnessing today on the edge of Europe, is really the current iteration of a centuries-long struggle. Where does Europe's border end and Russia's border begin? Now it might seem like a simple question, but it's defined the European continent for centuries. The border between Russia and Europe has constantly moved as a large chunk of Europe and European Russia. They sit on the northern European plain. This flat expanse of land begins in France, pivots in the east and south across the continent, opening up right under Russia's Dalston. Historically, it's been a major route of western expansion. The Slavic people emerged on Muscovy in the 14th century. They faced a major strategic challenge as their homeland was surrounded by thousands of miles of flat land, making Moscow indefensible over the centuries. Ivan the Terrible, Peter, the Great Catherine, and the stars that defended Moscow by expanding Russia's borders. A united and expanding Russia came to pose a serious major challenge to Europe. But its two key assets, land and natural resources, they became a constant temptation for European powers in the last 600 years. Russia has been invaded every century. In just the last 200 years, Russia has been invading on average every 33 years by European powers. The Europeans have for the last 600 years tried to expand Europe's borders into Russia. What emerged after World War II was Russia's borders expanded westward from Moscow nearly 1,000 miles all the way up to Berlin in Germany. These were areas Russia had never occupied in its history. For the first time, Russia was able to expand deep into Europe and create a buffer zone between its heartland and its enemies. And Russia finally had that strategic depth it's always desired. During the Cold War, the world watched as they believed Russian tanks running on a 1,500 vertical mile line from Norway down to Turkey, but also try to take the rest of Europe that was outside the Iron Curtain. In response, the US created a containment line around the USSR consisting of NATO, numerous bases, troops and nuclear weapons to stop any Soviet advancement. After decades of the space and arms race, rising tensions and the Republicans against Moscow's rule, as well as the security estates, in 1991 the Soviet Union finally collapsed and Russia's borders would shift 1,000 miles eastward as former satellite states and republics will now become independent nations. Once again, sensing the opportunity, Europe and the US would look to push the continent's border deep into Russia again. But this time, rather than sending in the soldiers, they used NATO and EU membership. From 1991, many nations that were behind the Iron Curtain, one by one they joined Western institutions. When the Baltic nations joined both the EU and NATO in 2002 and 2004, Moscow was just a mere 300 miles from Europe's borders, and St. Petersburg, a mere 100 miles. Since he emerges Russia's paramount leader, Vladimir Putin had been trying to reclaim Russia's strategic depth. Putin has been able to slow down European encroachment with his invasion of Georgia in 2008 and by supporting pro-Russian leaders to power in its buffer regions. But not halt the centuries-old struggle of European encroachment eastwards. This is where Ukraine comes into the picture. Ukraine remains one of the very few nations that act as a buffer zone for Russia today. But since Euro made an uprising in 2014, Europe has been integrating Ukraine to the west, and this has really got Russia worried. The deployment of 100,000 Russian troops is the modern version of a centuries-old battle between the Russians and the Europeans, who want to push their respective borders across the continent for power, wealth, land and resources. Ukraine is now the latest battle for this centuries-old struggle. Thanks for watching.